Very much for that introduction, which we now have to update. I was just reminded, I'm actually my 24th book comes out today. And this is an interesting part of what my campaign is all about, and it's fascinating in terms of what you see happening. My new book is called A Nation Like No Other, and it's about the heart and soul of America, the Declaration of Independence, the fact that we assert that we're endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights, that in America, sovereignty rests in you, from God to each one of you personally. Sovereignty rests in you. You own power of the government. That's part of why live free or die makes sense. That's part of why in the American system our Constitution begins with we the people. I think there are three large issues in the campaign next year. The first is the economy, and I'll come back to that. Healthcare is in part in the economy. The second is American exceptionalism versus European socialism. And healthcare is definitely in that debate. And the third is national security and foreign policy at a time when the world is dangerous. Those are the big things. It confuses some people in politics and some people in news media to actually have a candidate who would write an entire book as opposed to having a 30-second attack on it. You know, we have two themes in the American news media. There are no ideas, and why do you have ideas? And so you have to decide which candidate you want to be. Ironically, the most important campaign brochure in history has 85 chapters and is over 600 pages long. It's called the Federalist Papers. Because the Founding Fathers thought they ought to have a conversation about ideas. And the way you had a conversation about ideas is they wrote all of these articles. And they're pretty smart guys. Look at a guy like Madison, Jay, Hamilton. Look at a guy like Jefferson. They actually thought ideas mattered. Lincoln gave one major speech in 1860. It was 7,300 words long. He spent 3 months personally researching it at the law library in Springfield. Because he thought the leader ought to actually know what he was talking about. A different model from some modern lawyers. Now, I have two things. I have one about the legislature and then the other about business. On the legislative side, I worked very hard for 4 years at American Solutions, crisscrossed the country. We were in 5,800 races last year with endorsements and things we were involved. We were up here for a training program that some of you came to, I think, last summer. I can't tell you how exciting it was election night to have the largest increase. It wasn't the U.S. House where we had a terrific victory. It was the state legislature. We picked up 680 state legislators around the country that night, and 25 Democrats switched parties. We today have the largest number of state legislators in the Republican Party since 1925. And I have to say, I think that New Hampshire gave 1/7 of the total increase. So when I visited the New Hampshire House the other week, the speaker was very generous and invited me down on the floor. It was a thrill to see what you all are doing. And I think every state, I don't know how many states have business caucuses, but I want to encourage you to reach out to the other 50 states, because I think every state ought to have a business caucus. And by the way, this drives the news media nuts, because they think you're not allowed to be pro-business. But the fact is, in January of 2009, when Obama was at his peak and the business community had been beaten up by the news media, when asked by CBS News, do you think we do a better job of creating jobs by cutting business taxes or spending money through the government? It was 63 to 23 in favor of cutting business taxes. Only in Washington did the stimulus package make any sense, and that's because Washington got to spend the money. In the rest of the country, instinctively, the American people believe we need business caucuses. Now, I feel this personally. I helped found 4 small businesses since I left the speakership. I ran 4 small businesses, and we're spinning one of them off, and the other 3 are being consolidated into Gingrich production. But I've been through the process of how do you find the market? How do you close the sale? How do you make sure you can meet payroll? And so I'm very sympathetic as a small business owner to everybody else who's in small business. I'm going to go through very briefly, because I want to get to questions, but I will give you, if you wanted to end the Obama depression now, what would you do? Okay. We give a brief bit on taxes, a brief bit on regulation, a brief bit on legislation. On taxes, I do 5 bits. Make the current tax law permanent so there's no tax increase in 2013, so you create certainty in the system for investment. Go to 0 capital gains tax, eliminate the capital gains tax totally. Money will pour into the United States in order to be invested here to create jobs. Go to a 12.5% corporate tax rate, and ironically, at the highest tax rate in the world, for corporations. General Electric hires 375 tax lawyers and pays zero. At 12.5%, they'd fire half the lawyers and pay the check. So you'd actually have more money out of GE at 12.5% than you're going to get out of GE at 35%. But every business would have, you liberate the $1 trillion overseas that Ron Paul talked about, because at 12.5% will all come home. And so again, you'll have a huge increase in investment. Third, I'd go to 100% expensive. I've been in 2 or 3 different manufacturing facilities here in New Hampshire. They're relatively small machine tool places. When you talk to them about what would it be like if you could write off your newest equipment in 1 year, they would modernize every year. We'd have the most productive workers in the world, the most creative workers in the world, and we'd rebuild our machine tool industry. And finally, I would eliminate the death tax permanently. I think it's an immoral tax. It is wrong to say to somebody, if you work hard and you save, you do the right thing your whole lifetime, politicians are going to take half your money when you die. And I want very successful entrepreneurs not to spend the last 20 years of their life trying to avoid taxes. I want them to spend the last 20 years of their life creating a bigger company, hiring more people, and having the fun of being creative. So that's the tax side. We have to rethink our big bureaucracies. I've replaced the Environmental Protection Agency with an Environmental Solutions Agency, founded on the principle that you want to use science and technology, incentives and entrepreneurs to solve problems with the goal of having a sound economy and a sound environment simultaneously. And the current anti-business, anti-local control bureaucrats at EPA are killing parts of this economy. I would also create a modern Food and Drug Administration because we want to move ideas from the laboratory to the patient as rapidly as possible, not as slowly as possible. And there are millions of jobs to be created in the biological revolution. I want those jobs in the U.S., not in China or Europe or Japan. I would also have an American energy policy to keep $500 billion a year here at home, creating American jobs, not sending them to dictatorships and giving them to Venezuela or Saudi Arabia or Iraq. And that would lower at the margin the cost of all energy. You see that with natural gas, which, by the way, EPA is trying to stop. Well, we have huge new finds of natural gas in shale, over 100 years supply. And the result has been the price of natural gas is coming down because supply and demand works. Finally, I want to talk about legislation and the Federal Reserve. Congress this week, if it wanted to help all the families, one out of every 4, whose home is currently worth less than the mortgage. If it wanted to help small businesses finding it harder and harder to get a loan. If it wanted to help independent and community banks, which are really safe and dramatically more stable than the giant banks that are too big to fail. And by the way, if you're too big to fail, you're too big to be managed. We should repeal the Dodd-Frank bill this week. If we repealed the Dodd-Frank bill, housing prices would start back up, home builders would start back into business, small banks would suddenly flourish. You would dramatically reduce the power of the Treasury to micromanage and interfere with businesses. And we'd be healthier. It's not complicated, just repeal it. Second, we need a thorough audit of the Fed. And I have a very simple principle since Bernanke became chairman. And then this is the question every American deserves to have answered. Who got the money? They have poured billions and billions, hundreds of billions of dollars. Some of it went to the Libyan National Bank. At one point, the largest recipient was a French bank. Chunks of it went to Goldman Sachs. I think we ought to see every memo, every decision discussion. We ought to know where the money went. We ought to know why it went there. This is crony capitalism at its worst. The idea that one person, the chairman of the Fed, was controlling hundreds of billions of dollars in secret is unconscionable. And so I think we need to really look at fundamentally changing the Federal Reserve, taking all of that kind of behavior away from the Federal Reserve, returning the Federal Reserve to one job: keep the dollar stable. Give us sound, honest money, which is one of the major reasons we got to the Constitution. And finally, I think that the Treasury needs to lose most of its additional powers. Geithner is a New York insider taking care of New York insiders, and Bernanke's part of the same gang, and their commitment is to prop up the big boys at the expense of the whole rest of the country, and it is fundamentally wrong, and we're going to make it transparent, and you should be able to go online, and you should be able to see who got the money, and I guarantee you, if we publish everything about what they did, it will be one of the biggest scandals in American history.